هي الدكتور إبي حداد، كابتن فيليب بيل، حضورنا الكريم من أهل الصحافة والإعلام والمهتمين بهذا الحدث الثقافي والحضاري. أهلا وسهلا بكم من جديد. على الفور سنبدأ. نجتمع هنا للتعرف على صاحب النظرية القبطان فيليب بيل الذي وصل إلى لبنان بدعوة من الجمعية الدولية للمحافظة على سور وبدعوة من رئيستها الدكتورة مها الخليل شلبي. لما لهذا الحدث من أهمية بالنسبة للبنان الحضاري ووجه لبنان الحضاري. نبدأ فورا بكلمة الدكتور حداد، تفضل.
Shukran. Honorable guests, ambassadors, representatives, on behalf of President Joseph Jabra, who could not unfortunately join us today, I would like to welcome you all to this interesting event, which has been organized by LAU in collaboration with the Organization for the Preservation of Tyre, represented by Dr. Maha Khalil Shalabi. I want to thank Dr. Shalabi for this initiative and to thank all of you for coming on this Friday, the 13th in the evening, to witness maybe a very interesting and provocative lecture about our ancestors. I will not introduce Captain Beale. I think he will do that. Dr. Maha will do it. But suffice to say that we share a common heritage with Captain Beale. He's fascinated by the Phoenicians and by their ships, and our ship is on the logo of LAU and has been since the establishment of LAU. It has gone through multiple transformation from a trireme to a simple rather one-row ship, and so we have something in common with Captain Beale. So on behalf again of President Jabra, I would like to welcome you all and wish you a happy event. Thank you.
Thank you دكتور إبي حداد. الآن نستمع إلى كلمة الدكتورة مها خليل شلبي للتعريف بالبحار والبحاثة في البيل.
أيها الأصدقاء الأعزاء، ممثلي معالي الوزراء وبعض السفراء، هتكلم بالإنجليزية حتى صديقنا كابتن فيليب بيل يقدر يستوعب شو عم نقول. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you for sharing this event with us. I would like to thank Dr. Jabra, President of LAU, who is out of the country and couldn't join us today. As well, I want to thank Dr. Haddad, Dr. Abyad, for their valuable help hosting this conference to promote the heritage of Lebanon. It's a great honor that I stand before you here today at the start of the year 2017 to launch a very special project, Expedition Crossing the Atlantic, with Captain Philip Bell. Please come sit here. Some 7,000 years ago, a great nation was born in modern-day Lebanon, made of pioneers in many domains. The Phoenicians, our ancestors, inventors of the alphabet, the purple dye, blown glass, were the first global traders. They were blessed with green mountains covered with cedar trees, which gave them solid wood and made them master ship builders and the most outstanding seafarers of their time. They connected the three continents of the Mediterranean basin to the sheer rock cliffs of southwest England. These are facts. Despite what has been written and published, little is known about the Phoenicians and a lot yet to be revealed. One of our missions at the International Association to Save Tyre is to encourage and endorse all archaeological research that shed light on how much the world owes the Phoenicians. Now I ask you, did the Phoenicians discover a fourth continent? Did the greatest sailors of ancient times have capabilities to cross the Atlantic Oceans? You may say no. I say, why not? One man decided to prove that the Phoenicians had indeed crossed the Atlantic and the first to discover the New World. And our association will go above and beyond to support this endeavor. This man is Captain Beale with a big courage to cross the continent. And it's a dangerous mission, of course, and we appreciate his endeavor, really, and we thank him a lot for this commitment. Let us welcome together former British Navy, great adventurer and instigator of this exhibition, Captain Philip Beale.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, LAU, for allowing us to be here today. Captain Philip Beale, welcome.
Thank you.
I'd just like you to know that there will be a Q&A at the end of the lecture, so you'll be able to ask Captain Philip any questions you may have. So I'd like to start, Captain Philip, by asking you, how did your story with the Phoenicians begin?
Okay, and I'd just like to say before I start, thank you again to LAU and also to the International Association to Save Tyre for your fantastic hospitality this week. It's very much appreciated. So yes, how did I get involved in this whole area? Well, I was lucky enough when I was 17 years old to go onto an expedition in the Pacific on a sailing ship and visit some of the islands, and I saw the traders on their little canoes taking great voyages from island to island, and it really inspired me to think, you know, this is how cultures move from one island to another, from one country to another, and from one continent to another. And that's what so inspired me, and really for the rest of my life I've been pursuing this interest in cultural migrations through navigation and through boats.
Which brings us to our second question. What is the purpose of your visit? What are you doing in Lebanon today?
Okay, so the purpose of me being here in the Lebanon is, first of all, we have signed an agreement with the International Association to Save Tyre to work together to promote the Phoenician history and culture, and to help launch this expedition so that really we restore, you know, the Phoenician culture to its proper place in history. So I think it has been, you know, certainly by international commentators and historians, it's been very much underplayed, underappreciated.
Yes, so this will bring us to the first part of your lecture today. Can you tell us, how did you come up with the idea of building a Phoenician boat? How did the entire story start?
What happened was, I had done a voyage from Indonesia looking at how Asian culture had influenced Africa. This was in 2003. We built a double outrigger canoe, sailed it across the Indian Ocean to show how Madagascar and the Asian culture had influenced Madagascar and East Africa. And then I was looking at, well, who were the first people to trade with Africa? Who were the first people to circumnavigate Africa? And then I came across the reference that Herodotus had said the Phoenicians made the first circumnavigation of Africa. And I was talking with an academic friend at Oxford University, and he said, Philip, this is your next project. This is what you should do. You should build a Phoenician ship and sail it around Africa and show that it could have been done. And that's what we did with the help of many people here and elsewhere. In 2010, we completed it and came back here.
Could you please show us the details of the shipbuilding and the ancient ways of
Yes.
boats?
So the first part then I will do is just to talk to you about how we actually built the ship and how we did the voyage. It's because we've got quite a lot to get through, because I also want to talk about the theories of the Phoenicians sailing to the Americas, and I also want to talk to you about the plans of the expedition. So I'm just going to pick out a few highlights of the building of the ship, just to give you the background first. So there was a lot of research involved, and we found a 6th century wreck, and we got access to the information for that wreck for the, if you like, the designs for the building. And in 2005, I came to the Lebanon and to Syria to look for wooden boat builders that could build the ship. And unfortunately, as you know, in 2006, it wasn't possible to build the ship here. So we built it in Arwad, near Tartus in Syria. And the next few slides show this is the keel being laid, which was done in late 2007, and the first pegs being put into the keel. And here you see the first planks being assembled, and what you notice at the sides here are the dowels that are being driven into the planks, and these dowels are locking pegs that connect all the planks together. So this makes a very, very strong construction. And it's this construction of these, what the Romans called the Phoenician joints. It's this construction that enabled the Phoenicians to have the strongest ships, and that underpinned the fantastic trade that they were able to do, because they were more reliable and they became better seamen because they had this fantastic construction. And they really pioneered this technique. This is the, if you like, the shell of the ship in Arwad. And what you notice here is that it's built in the ancient way. They put the keel and all the planks together first, and only later do they add the ribs for more strength. So this is, if you like, they built on the basis of a canoe and added more and more and got bigger and bigger, and then they put the, as I say, the ribs in later. This is not how ships are built today. The modern way of building a ship, a wooden boat, is to make the skeleton first, and then they put the planks on. So we had to actually teach the boat builders in Arwad the ancient techniques. Then they put the ribs in and the structure to make it even stronger. And one of the things about the Phoenicians, they were the first boat builders to use iron nails. They didn't use a lot of iron nails, but where the ribs were, they supported them with some additional iron nails, which gave it extra strength. And some of these nails were, 10 inches long. And here she is. This is what she looked like when she first went into the water after about 9 months of being built. beautiful shape, and today she is really the only sailing Phoenician ship that exists. I'm just going to show you a very short clip of her sailing as she basically finished the circumnavigation of Africa, coming into Gibraltar. And I think you'll agree, it's a fantastic sight.
Could you please tell us the type of wood that was used to build that ship? Was it cedar wood, like the Phoenicians used to do?
Yes, so we kept true to the ancient techniques. We used the woods that would only have been available in ancient times. So we used a cedar for the keel, and then a Mediterranean pine for the planks. All the pegs were olive wood, and the ribs, most of it was Mediterranean oak, which was used in ancient times for the ribs, but we ran out of oak, so we also used walnut, and the walnut was also used as a wood in ancient times. So, yeah, that's a number of different woods. I know I've just missed one, and that's the cypress fir. We used the cypress fir for the mast and the boom because it's much more flexible and it can take the pressure of the sail. So that's just a little bit of a clip for you to see what we're really talking about and whether these kinds of ships could have sailed across to the Americas. So just a very quick resume of the voyage around Africa. I'm just going to mention a couple of pieces of information. The whole journey took 2 years to do, partly because we had some problems initially in the Red Sea. We missed our winds and currents in the Gulf of Aden, so we had to stay there 6 months until the right winds came again, so that delayed us a bit. But nevertheless, it took 2 years to sail around Africa. We weren't sailing all the time. We were in port some of the time. But I just want to pick up two little things for you to think about. One is, of course, we were doing this in 2009. And you may remember what was happening in 2009 around the Horn of Africa. This was the height of the piracy. The Somali pirates, they were taking ships pretty much every day, taking the crews and taking them hostage and keeping them in caves for as long or until such times as their relatives, raised enough money to get them released. So it was quite a worrying thing to have to sail around the Horn of Africa. But as you can imagine, I had spent 5 years doing all the research and the work, and although several people said, "You're mad if you're going to sail across with these pirates," I said, well, we spent so much time organizing this expedition, I can't stop, we're just going to do it. And we got to the Yemen, and then we went down towards Madagascar and run the gauntlet of these pirates. And the problem is that when you see an Arab dhow like this that's coming towards you, you just don't know whether they're going to jump on board and take you hostage or not. You just can't tell. And so you have your satellite phone ready to make the emergency call to get help, but help probably won't come. But you have the number anyway. So this is a very terrifying sort of time. We do take satellite communications, so we knew where the attacks were taking place every day, and we tried to avoid them and change the direction that we were sailing to get away from them. And in one case, we had an attack within 100 miles of us, as 100 miles ahead, and we would have been right where the pirates were had we not changed course. So that was one of the excitements, if you like, of the expedition. The other, if you like, highlight or the most worrying thing was sailing around the Cape of Good Hope. A lot of large ships have come to grief going around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa. It's feared by sailors, and we had to sail around it. And so what I'm going to show you now is just a very short clip of us sailing around the Cape of Good Hope. And you'll also see, which is always of interest to some people, is what toilets and facilities we have on board. And you'll see a lady just getting out of the toilet, and then she gets soaked with a lot of water that comes over the bow. So let me just show you that now.
Captain Philip, how many people were on board the expedition around the African continent?
Generally, we had about 10 to 15 people. Around the Cape, we actually had 15 sailors on board. Here's the lady, she's just finished her business with the toilet. And then she gets soaking wet. As you can see, it was quite rough here. There were 3 of us trying to steer the boats here. We also had to try and get, away from some of the big cargo ships that were coming around the Cape as well. So, reasonably challenging, but it was actually a really good sail. And you'll see in a second, we put a storm sail up because our mainsail had broken the night before. So we actually went around the Cape on this little green storm sail. That was sufficient because the winds were so strong. They were about 30 to 40 knots, and we went through and around the Cape on that. So that was just a little bit of an insight for 2 parts of what was effectively a 2-year journey around Africa. We then came back through the Mediterranean, and the picture that you can see in front of you is the ship at anchor in Cedar, just down the road. And here is a more picturesque picture of Phoenicia in Cedar. So that was the first part of the presentation I wanted to make.
Thank you, Captain Philip. So many people, so many scientists have speculated whether the Phoenicians had crossed the Atlantic Ocean and discovered the Americas. What do you think about these theories? And do you have some theories of your own on the matter? What is it that you believe in, actually?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think there are, and there have been, many people who've put forward theories. There have been several books written about, the Phoenicians crossing the Atlantic, getting to the Americas. And there are many very interesting glimpses of information. But right now, there isn't any what I would call silver bullet. There isn't a definitive piece of information that says absolutely. I'm going to talk a little bit later about some really interesting things, but there isn't the definitive proof. And that's really why we're doing the expedition, because the expedition allows people to get really interested in it, and I'm sure that over the next 5, 10, 15 years, the evidence that we're looking for will come about. Shall I explain a little bit?
Please, please.
So what I've done here is I've just listed some of the people who've written about the Phoenicians crossing the Atlantic to the Americas. There's Thomas Johnson. There's quite a lot of stories about the Phoenicians going to Brazil. There are inscriptions that have been put forward. However, the problem with, for example, the Brazilian inscriptions is that the skeptics sort of think that it's a fake, that it's a forgery. And you can argue it one way, you can argue it another way. But it's, for the skeptics, for the academics, the scientists, it's not conclusive proof. There's a gentleman called Barry Fell. He talked about the Phoenicians and made some arguments about the Aztecs and the Incas. But again, actually, he was derided really, and if you read his Wikipedia sort of reference, it basically sort of says, you know, and by the way, some of his peers thought he was a fraud. So probably not the most reliable source of information. And we've got a couple of others. I'll just flick through them. We have Heinz Sudoff, who wrote the book in German called Sorry Columbus, and a lot of the information there is quite interesting. The sort of what I call sort of based on mainly cultural diffusion and similarities between Phoenician cultures and what's found in Mexico today. You know, it's very interesting stuff, but again, nothing really concrete that the skeptics will accept. This is another example. Some would say this is proof. Professor Mark McKennaman, he discovered that on at least one set of Phoenician coins, gold coins from Carthage, there appeared to be a map of Europe and America at the foot of the coin. But it's absolutely tiny. But then the Phoenicians did use groups of engravers that had like a astigmatism in their eye that almost like could magnify and see and work in great detail. So it's not beyond the possibility. But again, the skeptics will say, well, you know, you can't really say 100% that this could just be the edge of the coin being a little bit muddled in the dye. So it's not conclusive. It's interesting, but it doesn't really get us where we want. But I think there are some areas that are really interesting. And the first one I want to talk about is the Azores, and then we might talk a little bit about DNA and sort of the botanical influences. Why do I mention the Azores? Well, here is the map of Europe and the Azores. And the Azores is about 900 miles into the Atlantic. It's a third of the way across. And what you have to understand, if I can put it like that, is how the winds and the currents work. And remember that in a Phoenician boat like Phoenicia can only sail one direction. A little bit of latitude either side, but it has to go with the wind. It cannot, like a modern yacht with a triangular sail, it can't go into the wind. It has to go with the wind. So if you have a look at this next slide here, this, by the way, was drawn by Benjamin Franklin, the President of the United States. Very, very clever man. He invented a lot of things. The use of electricity is attributed to him. He was a scientist. He was a great guy. He had these incredible interests, as well as going on to become President of the United States. I mean, I might say that, you know, the caliber of Benjamin Franklin was infinitely superior to the current president and president-elect of America. But he understood the Gulf Stream. And what this shows you is the way the currents and also the winds go around the Atlantic. And if we look back at the picture of the Azores, if it was colonized, it would mean that the Phoenicians would have had to approach it from the American side, because you couldn't sail directly. In fact, when the Portuguese discovered it, they actually arrived at it on a return voyage from Nigeria, because they had to go sail around, because you can't sail up to Gibraltar because the winds are against you. So it seems to me that if there was evidence of colonization of the Azores, that would be a step in the right direction. And when I first proposed this theory to some of the guys at the British Museum, they said, "Oh, Philip, there's no evidence of colonization of the Azores. There are stories, but there's no evidence." In spite of the fact that the Portuguese explorers who discovered it said they found some inscriptions there that they couldn't read and they didn't understand. But the Portuguese government, pretty much to this day, do not want to confirm any Phoenician influence there, because they want to, they're embarrassed by the fact that it would undermine the Portuguese claims to be, tremendous European explorers. So you can imagine my interest when two things happened. Just 2 or 3 years ago, a group of archaeologists from Portugal discovered, or they claim to have discovered, both Phoenician or Carthaginian, I should say, which I take to be the same thing, the Carthaginians from Tunisia being Phoenicians, Carthaginian temples and burial chambers. And, as I say, some of the Portuguese authorities are not hurrying to endorse this work, and more money is needed to do more research. But it does look like that the Phoenicians did colonize the Azores. And the other piece of evidence that, funnily enough, I didn't have it confirmed until yesterday, was that there was a pot of Carthaginian coins that were found a couple of hundred years ago in Corvo, on the most westerly island of the Azores. And they went, I think, to the King of Spain, and then a Swedish coin collector got hold of them, and he wrote a paper about these coins and said they were Carthaginian, and this was proof that there was about 9 coins. And then, as my understanding was, that they had got lost, and you couldn't actually say that there was evidence there. But anyway, yesterday I was with Dr. Antoine Carr, who's in the audience here, and his new book actually said that 2 of these coins are actually in, here's the book, bit of publicity, great book. 2 of these coins are actually in Beirut University. And so there is actually a paper trail to evidence because I thought they had sort of disappeared and it was just a story. So that's interesting. The other thing I'd just like to mention then is we are discovering more and more archaeological information every day. I've put here a couple of coins, the pictures here is just of a coin that was found in the southwest of England, near Bristol, a year ago. And when I asked 5 years ago, we were going to sail the ship back to England, I asked the Cornish Museum, would they be interested in working with us to, ensure that people realize that the Phoenicians came to the southwest of England, because it's written in history books, And what they said was, no, there's no definitive proof that they did. Absolutely no definitive proof. So I was very delighted, last year when this coin was found, that not only the Cornish Museum, but the British Museum confirmed it and said, yeah, we totally believe that the Phoenicians traded with the Southwest. So in a period of a few years, they'd actually changed their mind of the fact that this coin was found after a flood. It was on a major trade route, and they said, yeah, we believe this now. So my point here is that a little bit of new evidence can change thinking a great deal. And we have to remember that it was only 60 years ago that the settlement that the Vikings made in Newfoundland was discovered. Up until that point, nobody believed that the Vikings had reached North America. It was just, there's no evidence. Then a group of archaeologists found this little settlement, and now everybody believes that 1,000 years ago, the Vikings reached North America. There's lots of little pieces of information that are very interesting, but we don't have, if you like, the final piece of information. And what we're hoping with this expedition is we're going to get more, categorical information. What are these pieces of information? I'll just give you a couple of examples. One of them, there is an Assyrian relief, for example, from the 7th century BC, and it's got a pineapple on it. Now, a pineapple, it only came from the New World, and it certainly didn't come after Columbus because it's on a 7th century BC relief. So why won't, the world accept that the academics that have looked at it said it's unmistakably a pineapple. In fact, I was lucky enough to have a pineapple for breakfast, and I saw it being cut up. And there isn't many things that are, you can say that are similar to a pineapple. So there is evidence, but there's nothing that's accepted as conclusive at the moment. So why are we doing the expedition? We're doing it as an exercise in experimental archaeology. We're going to see whether a Phoenician ship could cross the Atlantic, get through all the gales and the like. So that's the first part. But then the other part of it is to create more interest in this whole area, to get more evidence, get a higher level of interest. And I think over the next few years, the evidence will come forward that is really compelling, that actually will then put, the Lebanese and the Phoenician culture on the right scale. Because it is the case that, the Romans and the Egyptians and the Greeks, they're in a lot of the national curriculums. Their documentaries are made every week almost about the Egyptians, but the Phoenicians are very much overlooked. And so I'm hoping that the expedition will start to, in a little way, redress this balance.
Shed more light on the Phoenician civilization. And now you're going to tell us about your upcoming expedition across the Atlantic Ocean that's going to start in September. My first question would be, why did you choose this particular route? And why not, for instance, from the Green Cap to Brazil, which is a much shorter distance? So why from Gibraltar to the Americas?
Okay. So, as Shane has just said, we've got the map here of our planned expedition, and we're going to start this in Gibraltar. Why have we chosen this route? Well, there's two reasons, and this supports, I think, why the Phoenicians may well have made it across the Atlantic. There were some 200 settlements down the Spanish, Portuguese and Moroccan coast, and places like Madeira and the Canary Islands, archaeologists have proven that they colonized these areas. So with all this trade going on, there was a massive trade in fish, where the Phoenicians brought fish into the Mediterranean from the Atlantic. There was all of the metals, I mean, on an industrial scale, gold and silver coming from the Iberian Peninsula into the Mediterranean and back here to the Middle East. So, tremendous amount. But I think that, so it's partly because it fits with what was there. This is what was going on, and therefore, of course, they would have left from where they had a strong seafaring base. But also, if we cast our minds back to the Benjamin Franklin sketch of the Gulf Stream, the winds and the currents will take you directly from the Canary Islands right away across to the Caribbean. All you've got to do is to put your sail up, and you're pretty much guaranteed that a month or so later you will arrive around the Caribbean. You may arrive in Florida, or you might arrive in Brazil, but you will pretty much be guaranteed. And of course, the Phoenicians were the most incredible sailors. I mean, they were the first to sail at night, because we know they discovered the pole star, so they would have known about the seasons. They would have known about the best time to go, and therefore that's why I think it's the most likely route. So we're going to start in Gibraltar. We're going to do a courtesy visit to Cadiz, which was a city that was started by the Phoenicians. Then we go down to Mogador, where there's the Phoenician temple, then across to the Canary Islands, and then we're just going to let the ship sail almost by itself to see where we end up and where they may have ended up. But certainly, in a way, that's what Christopher Columbus did, and he ended up in Haiti, as we know. A little bit more detail. We're putting together an international crew, and we're hoping that we already have one Lebanese crew member confirmed, who's here and is going to talk in a few minutes later. We're getting plans together to document this with TV and the like. We are looking for some additional sponsors. I mean, the good, positive news is the boat's fine, it's good in good measure, but we need to pay for the expedition, so we are here partly to raise some sponsorship. And there may be some opportunities, if we can get some other organisations involved, for some young Lebanese explorers to join us on one or two legs or something, so that, if you like, the opportunity that I had as a young guy could be repeated and given to some other people. So that's our plan, basically.
Thank you very much. Before we move forward with the Q&A, I'd like to call to the stage Remy Ahwaji. He is organizing this expedition with Captain Beale and will be on board as a crew member. Remy.
Thank you, شيماء. Bonsoir جميعا. بحب أحكي بالعربي مشان الكل يفهمني وتسمعوني منيح. أول شيء ميرسي كثير للإليو لتنظيم هذه المحاضرة الحلوة. بحب أوجه شكر كمان خاص لمدام شلبي وسيف تاير أسوسيشن. شغلهم كان كثير رائع، الشغل مع التيم تبعهم بتعقد، كلهم كثير دايناميك، يعني كثير انبسطنا نشتغل معهم أنا والكابتن فيليب. مش هطول عليكم أبدا، بس بدي أقول كلمة على السريع. أول شيء أنا أول مرة سمعت عن الإكسبيديشن الأولى اللي هي حوالي أفريقيا، كثير تحمست، بس انتبهت لشغلة إنه ما كان في حدا لبناني مشترك على متن السفينة. فأول شيء عملته وقت قدرت اتصل بالكابتن فيليب بيل، قلت له كابتن ما فيك you cannot make this project without having somebody Lebanese on board, because we as Lebanese this is very, very important to us. And, thank you. So من بعد ما قلت له هالشيء للكابتن كان بدي مش بس انه يكون في انه اول اكسبيديشن كان فيها استقبال مسيو جورج فودول استقبلوا الكابتن وقت اجوا على صورة الشيء، بس اللي حابب انا نعمله للاكسبيديشن اللي جاي هي مش بس سبورت، بس كمان حتى وجود لبناني على متن السفينه ومشاركه يعني دايركت مع الكرو تبع الكابتن. سو كل شيء حابب اقوله نحن هون اليوم استفيدوا منا، ما تستحوا تحكوا معنا بالاخر، نحن موجودين مش بس انا عم بشترك، نحن عم نفتح كمان مجال لغير شباب لبنانيين يشتركوا معنا. اذا في سبونسرز، اذا في شركات حابه تبعت حدا من قبلها مع الاكسبيديشن the way is open. فتعالوا احكوا معنا بالاخر. ما بعرف اذا في شيء بعد لازم نقوله. ميرسي كثير، وان شاء الله نتذكر انه هذا البروجكت مش بس تاريخي بس كمان بيخص مستقبل لبنان وحضارته اكيد.
Okay, so if anybody has any questions, join me, please. We'll start with the first question, the gentleman.
Hi, Raji Maas. Can I ask, what were the dimensions of the ship? That's three questions. What's the dimensions? The second, I studied ore geology in Leicester, so whenever we visited the mines of the Midlands, they told us that the Phoenicians used to come and mine there. So that's that. And the third is that how, we're going to talk to you later, but if you can advertise it better on how to join the crew or part of the leg, because we're working on a different project that's similar to what you're doing.
So the dimensions are pretty consistent with the formula that there is for Phoenician boats. They were typically 3 times as long as they were wide. So our boat is nearly 6 meters across the beam in terms of width, and it's just under 20 meters long. So this was sort of the formula, 3 to 1. So they're very broad, beamy ships. So that was the first question. The second question, the Midlands. Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I find this whole thing about the evidence and stuff quite sometimes frustrating, because people say, well, this is fact, this is known, and then you come across, dare I say it, some skeptical academics who are professionals. That's what they do, and they say if you haven't got scientific evidence, then you cannot make that argument. So that's the frustration. I hadn't heard that particular thing, but certainly the legends and the stories of tin mining in Cornwall is well known and referred to in ancient texts. So that's that. And then in terms of getting involved, we've put up here on slides we've got a couple of websites. There's the Save Tyre Foundation that we're working with as our partners here, and our own website. And if you Google me or the project, we can email and the like. So we'd be really interested to hear from any of you who can help us in any way, whether it's financially or practically or in kind. Whatever you can do to help us, that's really would be great.
Thank you. Next question, the gentleman there. Yes.
Alex Sama. The first question is just a technical question. How high were the waves around the Cape?
Around the Cape, yeah.
Around the Cape. But the main question is, how far from shore did you navigate when circumnavigating Africa? How far could you allow yourself to be from shore? And since this voyage now will be across the Atlantic, you will not have any shore for close to 2,000 kilometers. You will be just going with the wind. And the corollary question is, in your opinion, was the trip of the Phoenicians planned, or did the winds take 1 or 2 ships there by coincidence, and then the route was open to them?
Yeah. So, question was really about the first question was about the height of the waves around the Cape. Generally, they were about 3 meters high there was a swell of about 7 meters, because there's some big rolling waves. But the height of the sort of individual waves would have been about 3 meters. So 10, 12 foot. But you know, that's not a big problem, to be honest, because we're sailing with the wind and the waves. Generally, we're not fighting them. The ride on Phoenicia is actually, you know, more comfortable than you might think. How far offshore did we go? Well, with, for example, the Somali pirates, we had to go 1,000 miles offshore, and there were still pirates out at that thing. So we don't have a problem with being offshore. I mean, to me, 1 square meter of sea is very much like the next. It doesn't really matter where, you know, that square meter is. We're quite happy to go a long way offshore.
Next question, please.
Oh, and I would just say, sorry, that, you know, the Phoenicians, I mean, there is this sort of feeling that, oh, they had these little boats and they only kept in sight of land. But actually, you know, the Greek enemies wrote that the Phoenicians were the greatest sailors, and they were the first people to sail at night and were confident of sailing outside of the sight of land. So, you know, and if you were going to sail to the Azores, or even the Canary Islands, you're out of sight of land from the mainland, you're going to have pretty capable boats and be pretty confident. So, you know, we have to get away from this notion that the Phoenicians just had these little boats with the horses' heads on. No, they had proper ocean-going and large, you know, trading vessels, some of them up to 30 meters long. Sorry.
And was it planned? The third question.
Oh, was it planned? I think initially it would have been probably by accident, by accident, but then later would have been a discovery. I mean, you know, they would have gone again once they knew.
Okay.
Go ahead.
My turn?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning.
Captain Philip, I have 2 questions if you allow me. The first one is about the routing, which I'm asking to the gentleman. You know, historically, I'm not a Navy technically like yourself, but they say that they sailed all the way north to Greenland, Iceland, the Canadian shore, and then down. And this is a Viking theory, the Scottish theory, and many others. Why did you take this routing? This is a technical question, my first one.
The questions about the theory, could they have gone up to the northern route? And there are, you know, historical accounts of the Phoenicians going up further north than Great Britain. But I think the probability is they didn't have the support mechanisms there to go extend much further beyond that. Or if they did, we haven't found them. You know, there's no real evidence of the Phoenicians being in that, you know, upper part of the northern hemisphere. Yes, they could have probably done it, but I mean, it would be, for them, you know, it would have been quite cold, quite bitter. For the Vikings, they were used to that kind of weather. And they would have to go really far north because the Gulf Stream prohibits you crossing the Atlantic directly across, say, from Great Britain across to New York. You can't do that because the currents are completely, you know, and the wind completely the wrong way. So you've got to, as you say, go right up to Greenland. And you can really only do that in the summer. That means you've got to be based up there. You know, they'd be a long way from home. It seems unlikely, more unlikely and much more likely that they would have gone from the Canary Islands where they were based and they were comfortable with that climate.
My second one. Okay. You heard, being one of the British Navy officers, definitely you heard of the Sinclair family.
Yeah.
Sinclair. As a proud Lebanese, I need to ask you honestly, why you have chosen to advocate Phoenicians rather than advocating the British scenario, you know, of discovering the Americas before the Columbus? Yes. The Sinclair. Being proud, I'm so happy. It's music to my ears.
No, I have to say, I've always been much more interested in the cultures and histories of ancient peoples rather than, say, the Sinclair family. But also, it's much more fun to come to the Lebanon and do a project like this than to do it in Wales or Ireland. So, much better.
Thank you for your intervention. I have two small questions, please. The first one, I noticed you had a solar panel plus some new modern technology. So are you going to give it a chance to use the compass on the ancient way, etc., only to test, really to have all the chances to prove your theory? This is my first question. The second one, I saw the Union Jack. So are we going to have a promise to add the Lebanese flame during your next trip?
Yeah, we can just answer the first one, or the last question first. Yeah, we can always add a Lebanese flag. In fact, I'm slightly embarrassed by how much the cameraman focused on that British flag. But from a legal point of view, technical point of view, it's a British registered boat, but doesn't mean you can't fly the Lebanese flag. So that's, yeah, not a problem. Your first point, sorry, just technology. That's right. So we will be doing some experimental work with astronavigation, and it's very interesting when we went around Africa, coming up towards the equator, when the first time we could see the pole star, and then we could say, the Phoenicians would be comfortable now because the pole star suddenly came into view and they would know where north was. But from a safety point of view, but also from a communication point of view, we have a satellite communications because the thing is, every day we're going to be plotting the position of the ship on our website as we go. Every 4 hours we'll plot the position, and we'll also have photos of what's going on every day, and that'll be on the website. We'll send some video clips back as well. So we do have satellite communications. And the other thing is, because we have these huge container ships that are going over 20 knots, sometimes they don't see a little wooden boat in the sea, and therefore we need to have some communications to talk to them, to tell them we're here and we don't want to end up as matchsticks in the water. So we do have modern communication. But the sailing is all traditional. There's no winch to get us out. We have to do that ourselves.
September, we start the trip. It's the end of the summer, so it will be dangerous, period to cross in the beginning of autumn, I don't know.
Well, sorry, when we get down to the Atlantic, down towards the equator, it'll be better. But no, the real reason for that is one of the dangers of this adventure is the hurricane season that comes through. So hurricanes should be finished, I estimate, by middle of October, and then if we leave a little sort of after September, October from Canary Islands, hurricanes should be out of the Caribbean by then. So that's more in my mind than anything else. There's a lady here that had a question. Oh, sorry. There was a lady there, yeah.
I'm an archaeologist, and I was very lucky to attend the launching of your expedition from Arwad. I was present there, and I understood then that this Syrian association was the sponsor of this project. I wonder what happened to this association. That's my first question. The second question I will ask you after you answer this first one.
Obviously, we built the ship in Arwad in Syria. As mentioned, partly because we couldn't do it here. But I mean, the main thing was that in Arwad, obviously, there was a strong boat building community there. The way these things work is that if you do not get the support of the government or some support in a country, when things go wrong, you need the support. Now, we had the support of the Syrian government, but it was never in writing. It was always just acknowledged. There was never any thing in writing. It just didn't happen.
It sailed from there.
Sorry?
It sailed from there.
Oh, yeah. Well,
you had the support, but never mind.
Sorry,
what happened to the association?
I'm not sure what association you're referring to.
British Syrian.
Oh, the British Syrian Society?
Yes.
That still exists, but in a very low-key way. I mean, the British Syrian Society was very much, dare I say it, tied to government individuals, putting it, correctly. It does still exist, and I think it will continue to exist. And I think it did a lot of good work, but I think, with the problems in Syria that we all know about, it's had to be very much sort of softly. I think people just don't want to go near it. And I think they've really, reduced their activities.
My second question is more scientific. You mentioned the discovery of tombs, burials, temples, and inscriptions. We didn't see any of these, any pictures of these. Do you have them?
I do, and I can send them to you.
Because these are the main pieces of evidence for us to judge as a scientific
Yeah. The Portuguese archaeologists have written papers, they've presented them at international conferences, and
some pictures of pottery, for instance, from the tombs or the inscriptions.
Yeah.
The lady in blue, please. Next question. Yes. Please go ahead. This will be our last question. However, you're all welcome to join us around the cocktail reception, courtesy of LAU, and continue this debate together. Okay? Okay, then the gentleman here, and then we end it. Please, go ahead.
Lina Yunus from the National News Agency. I just want to ask you one question about the expedition that you're intending to undertake in September, maybe. Is it, what's the point you want to make out of this expedition? Is it to prove that the Phoenician boats are capable or were capable of crossing the Atlantic and thus discover the fourth continent? Or is it you want to further explore or seek other evidence that the Phoenicians have indeed crossed the Atlantic?
The answer is both. We wanted to do the expedition as an exercise in experimental archaeology, and we am I not coming across? And we also want to, personally, I want to try to write a book to bring together a lot of this evidence, but we want to inspire and enthuse people to go out and look for more evidence.
Okay, next question.
Both.
The gentleman here.
Thank you. Sailing time, 1 to 3 months to land on the Caribbean island.
How much time?
Yeah, from Canary Islands, 5 to 6 weeks, something.
5 to 6 weeks, no more. Another question: did any of the Facebook or Instagram or somebody is following you as to be online all time?
Yes, all the time.
Thank you.
Just George Nicholas.
Thank you. My name is Josh Fadwood. I am the representative of the Phoenician International Research Center. And Dr. Maha mentioned during her introduction to Captain Philip that not much is known about Phoenician history. And she's absolutely right. Not much is known about the Phoenician history. You don't find many books in foreign libraries about the Phoenicians, of their history. And there are two main reasons for that.
Do you have a question?
Yes.
Do you have a particular question?
Yes.
Please continue.
The first reason is there is continuous assault on Phoenician history and Phoenician civilization from different organizations around the world and even foreign governments. And the second reason is the reluctance of our people, our communities, to embrace the Phoenician culture and the Phoenician history, like they have embraced other cultures, such as the French culture or the Arab culture. So we want to thank you, Captain Philip, for doing the work for us and for showing our people that we have history, we have heritage, and we have civilization that we can be proud of. So thank you so much.
One last question before. Yes, to the gentleman with the yellow tie.
Yes, Philip, welcome back. I don't have a question, I just have a clarification. Because from what our Lebanese sailor mentioned, there was no Lebanese involvement when the ship was launched in Arwad. And there was, yes, the British Syrian Association was one of the sponsors. But I met Philip 8 years ago, and I used to work at Beale Bank, Syria. And Beale Bank, Syria, as a Lebanese bank in Syria, sponsored the launch, and we had to be part of this expedition because Phoenicians were on the coast. Now, they were in Arwad, but they were in Sur, they were everywhere. And yes, there was a Lebanese participation.
So hopefully Biblos Bank will be also sponsoring the upcoming expedition.
I don't work for Biblos Bank anymore. I work for the Arab Bank now.
And Arab Bank, of course, we would
Well, I think you
want
should
to see Arab
talk
Bank's logo on that sail. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Please, Captain Beale, conclude, please.
Yeah, just very quickly, I'd just like to thank Lebanese American University for hosting this, but also thanks to the people who made it, if you like, possible for the Phoenician project to be launched. One was Nadim Gamsus, who was a sponsor at Biblos Bank in Damascus at the time, and George Fadul, who organized the homecoming here in Lebanon when we got back in 2010. So I wanted just to thank all the people who were involved, and I hope that we can all work together for the future. So do come and join us for a drink. Thank you.
Thank you.